The phone rang just as I was about to pour myself a cup of tea. It was late, and the shrill sound shattered the quiet evening like glass. Glancing at the screen, my heart sank when I saw the name flashing, Mom. We hadn't spoken in weeks, not since the last argument over something trivial, or so I thought. But her call now felt out of place, almost ominous. Hello. My voice came out steadier than I expected, though the knot in my stomach tightened with every second. She didn't respond. Emma, she finally said, her tone unusually soft, almost pleading. We need to talk. My grip on the phone tightened. About what? There was a pause, long enough for me to imagine all sorts of scenarios, none of them good. Then she spoke again, her words tumbling out quickly, as if trying to get it over with. Your inheritance, we made some decisions. About the lake house. The lake house. I repeated dumbly, confusion clouding my mind. What lake house? The only one I knew of belonged to our neighbors, and even then, I'd never set foot inside it. Yes, she continued, her voice growing firmer now, more confident. We used your trust fund to buy it. All three of us are on the deed. Isn't that exciting? Exciting wasn't the word that sprang to mind. Alarm bells were ringing loud and clear. Wait, you used my money? Without asking me first. It's not just yours anymore, Emma, she interrupted before I could finish. It's ours. A family investment. Something we can all enjoy together. But something about her explanation didn't sit right. Why did this feel less like an invitation and more like a declaration? And why had they kept it from me until now? Before I could press further, she added, You'll understand once you see it. For bedrooms, a private beach. It's perfect for us. Your dad and I have already started planning renovations. I stared blankly at the wall, processing her words. Perfect for us? Renovations? None of this made sense. And what happens if I don't want to be part of this family investment? I asked cautiously, dreading the answer. Her laughter was brittle, forced. Don't be ridiculous, Emma. Of course you do. This is your chance to give back to the family who raised you. Give back. Raised me? Anger flared within me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Mom, I think we should discuss this properly. Can we meet up soon? She hesitated, then agreed reluctantly. Fine. Tomorrow afternoon at the cafe downtown. Be there by 3. As I hung up, my hands trembled slightly. Something about this whole situation reeked of deception, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Grandma Rose's lessons about money being a tool, not a goal, would come into play here. Whatever was happening, I knew one thing for sure. I needed answers, and fast. By the time I arrived at the cafe the next day, my nerves were shot. Mom sat waiting for me, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I approached, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Good timing, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Now, let's clear things up. You're probably wondering why we decided to use your inheritance without consulting you first. I admitted, folding my arms defensively. Explain. Well, she began, leaning forward conspiratorially, your dad and I realized how much better off we'd be with a little extra financial cushion. The bookstore hasn't been doing well lately, and his teaching salary barely covers our expenses. So, when we found out about the lake house opportunity, you bought it outright with my trust fund. I finished for her, my voice flat. All $800,000 of it. Her expression faltered briefly, but she recovered quickly. Technically, yes. But think about it, Emma. Now we have something tangible, a legacy to leave behind. Don't you see how important this is? No, I snapped, unable to hold back any longer. What I see is betrayal. Grandma Rose worked hard to build that trust for me, specifically for me. Not for you two to squander on some flashy vacation home. Her face hardened, and for the first time, I saw the same greed in her eyes that Grandma Rose had warned me about. Don't act high and mighty, Emma. You wouldn't have done anything useful with that money anyway. At least we put it to work. Her words stung, cutting deeper than I cared to admit. But beneath the hurt, anger bubbled fiercely. If that's true, then why didn't you tell me sooner? Why keep it a secret? We weren't keeping it a secret, she lied smoothly. We wanted to surprise you, to show you how responsible we could be.
Right.
Because nothing says responsibility like spending someone else's life savings without their consent. For the rest of the conversation, I listened half-heartedly as she tried to justify their actions. Deep down, I knew she wouldn't budge, no matter how many facts I threw at her. By the end of it, I left the cafe feeling defeated, yet oddly determined. If they thought they could get away with this, they were sorely mistaken. That night, after tossing and turning for hours, I pulled out my phone and dialed Patricia Chen's number. She'd helped settle Grandma Rose's estate years ago, and if anyone could make sense of this mess, it was her. "Patricia," I said once she answered, skipping pleasantries altogether. "I need your help. My parents stole my inheritance." Over the following days, Patricia dug deep into the paperwork surrounding the lake house purchase. What she uncovered shocked even her, and she'd seen plenty in her line of work. "The official deed filed with the county only lists your parents' names," she explained during one of our meetings. "The documents you signed initially included yours, but somehow, those changes weren't reflected in the final submission."
Fraud.
Plain and simple. They'd manipulated the system, swapping documents after the closing to cut me out entirely. And to add insult to injury, they'd taken out a $200,000 home equity line of credit against the property, splurging the money on luxury items and memberships to exclusive clubs. They crossed a line, Patricia assured me, her voice sharp with determination. "We'll file a civil suit immediately, along with an emergency injunction to prevent them from taking out additional loans. After that, we'll pursue legal action to restore your name to the deed and recover damages." Hearing her outline the plan gave me a strange sense of relief. For the first time since discovering their betrayal, I felt like I might actually win this fight. But winning didn't mean avoiding conflict. When I confronted my parents with the evidence Patricia had gathered, their reactions ranged from denial to thinly veiled threats. Mom dismissed everything outright, calling me ungrateful and accusing me of ruining the family dynamic. Dad, meanwhile, attempted to guilt-trip me, using old nicknames and vague promises of reconciliation if I backed down. Neither approach worked. Armed with Grandma Rose's wisdom and Patricia's guidance, I stood firm. "You took advantage of my kindness," I told them plainly. "Now you'll face the consequences." Their social media posts only fueled the fire. Photos of lavish parties and champagne toasts filled my feed, each caption dripping with entitlement. One post in particular caught my attention, a picture of them lounging on the deck, glasses raised, with the caption, "Sometimes you have to protect your peace and cut out negativity. Some people just don't understand class." Class? I forwarded the post to Patricia, who replied instantly, "This seals it. The judge will love this." In the courtroom, reality hit harder than I anticipated. My parents sat across the room, dressed impeccably, pretending none of this mattered. Their lawyer droned on about errors in judgment, while Patricia dismantled their arguments piece by piece. Judge Helen Martinez listened intently, her gaze sharp and unyielding. When she addressed my mother directly, asking why she'd excluded me from the deed despite providing the entire purchase price, Mom faltered visibly. Her excuses fell flat under the weight of evidence, bank statements, emails, social media posts, all pointing to deliberate fraud. In the end, the judge granted my petition to correct the deed and referred the matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. As the verdict was read aloud, I watched my parents deflate, their carefully constructed facade crumbling before my eyes. Outside the courthouse, I breathed deeply, letting the tension drain from my body. Justice may not erase the pain, but it restored a small measure of balance. Grandma Rose's lessons echoed in my mind, reminding me that true wealth lies not in possessions, but in integrity and resilience. For now, though, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. They'd played dirty, but I'd fought back, and won. The weeks that followed the court ruling were a blur of emotions. I spent most of my time going over the details with Patricia, preparing for the possibility of criminal charges against my parents. Despite the judge's decision to restore my name to the deed and refer the case to the district attorney, my parents refused to acknowledge their wrongdoing. Instead, they doubled down on their defensiveness, painting me as the ungrateful child who had ruined their dreams. Their social media presence became even more toxic. Photos of the lake house disappeared, replaced by carefully curated images of them enjoying simpler pleasures, a cup of coffee on a rainy day, a walk in the park, but the captions still dripped with passive aggression. One post in particular stood out. Some people just don't understand what it means to sacrifice. The comments beneath it were filled with supporters praising their resilience and condemning me without knowing the full story. I ignored the noise, focusing instead on rebuilding my life. With Patricia's help, I regained control of the lake house and began making plans to sell it. The money would go toward paying off some of the debts my parents had accrued using the home equity line of credit, and whatever remained would be reinvested into something meaningful, a scholarship fund in Grandma Rose's name, perhaps, or a donation to a cause she cared deeply about. But selling the house wasn't easy. Every visit brought back memories of those fleeting moments when I'd allowed myself to believe we could all coexist peacefully. Walking through the rooms, I remembered planting flowers on the deck, helping Mom arrange furniture, and listening to Dad talk excitedly about hosting family gatherings. None of it felt real anymore. The place had become a monument to betrayal, not unity. One evening, as I sat alone on the porch overlooking the water, I pulled out my phone and dialed Jennifer, the same Jennifer whose daughter had gotten into Princeton years ago. We hadn't spoken since high school, but her name had come up so often during my parents' arguments that I felt compelled to reach out. "Jennifer?" I asked hesitantly when she answered. "Emma?" Her voice was warm, surprised. "Is everything okay?" "I need your advice," I admitted. Over the next hour, I poured out the entire story, the inheritance, the betrayal, the legal battle. To my relief, she listened patiently, offering words of encouragement rather than judgment. "You're doing the right thing," she said firmly. "Your grandparents worked hard to give you that trust. It's yours to use however you see fit. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for standing up for yourself." Her support meant more to me than she'd ever know. For the first time in months, I felt less alone. As the days turned into weeks, news of the court case spread beyond our immediate circle. Friends and acquaintances reached out, some expressing sympathy, others curiosity. A few even offered unsolicited opinions about how I should handle things moving forward. But one message stood out, a text from Aunt Clara, my dad's sister, whom I hadn't seen in years. "Emma," she wrote, "can we meet? There's something I need to tell you." Curiosity got the better of me, and we arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown. When I arrived, Aunt Clara looked older than I remembered, her once bright eyes dimmed by years of disappointment. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "They've been like this for decades," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "Always chasing after status, always trying to keep up appearances. Your grandma tried to warn them, but they wouldn't listen. And now look where it's gotten them." Her words confirmed what I'd suspected all along, that my parents' behavior wasn't new, just amplified by desperation. Hearing it from someone outside the situation gave me a strange sense of clarity. They weren't monsters. They were flawed people who had lost sight of what truly mattered. Still, knowing that didn't erase the pain. Selling the lake house took longer than expected due to the outstanding loans and liens placed against it. By the time the sale finally closed, I was emotionally drained but determined to move forward. The proceeds barely covered the debts, leaving little left over for anything else. Yet somehow, it felt like enough. On the day of the closing, I drove out to the lake one last time. Standing at the edge of the property, I watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting golden reflections across the water. Grandma Rose's lessons echoed in my mind. Money is just a tool. True wealth comes from building something lasting. I smiled through tears, whispering softly, "Thanks for teaching me that, Grandma. I'll do my best to honor you." The weeks following the court ruling brought a whirlwind of emotions, but also clarity. Selling the lake house wasn't just about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. It was about rebuilding trust in myself and honoring Grandma Rose's legacy. With Patricia by my side, I began drafting plans for how to use whatever funds remained after settling the debts my parents had racked up. A scholarship fund in Grandma Rose's name seemed fitting, a way to channel her wisdom and generosity into something lasting. But before I could fully focus on that, there were loose ends to tie. My parents, predictably, refused to accept the judge's decision gracefully. Their social media presence turned even more toxic, filled with posts laced with thinly veiled jabs at me. One evening, as I scrolled through yet another batch of their carefully curated photos, I stumbled upon something unexpected, an old photo album shared by one of Mom's friends. It contained pictures from years ago, family gatherings, birthday parties, and holidays we'd spent together. For a moment, nostalgia hit hard. These weren't the people who sat across from me in the courtroom. These were the versions of them I remembered growing up. The ones who laughed freely, hugged tightly, and seemed genuinely happy without needing to prove anything to anyone. It made me wonder, when had they changed? Was it always lurking beneath the surface, or had life's pressures slowly eroded their better instincts? I called Aunt Clara again, hoping she might shed some light. She agreed to meet me at the same cafe where we'd talked earlier, bringing along a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside were letters written by Grandma Rose over the years, addressed not just to me but to my entire family. Each letter carried her signature blend of warmth and practical advice, urging us all to prioritize connection over possessions, kindness over competition. Your grandma knew, Aunt Clara said softly, handing me the stack. She saw this coming long before you did. She tried to warn them, but they wouldn't listen. Reading those letters became both cathartic and painful. In one, Grandma Rose wrote directly to my mom, cautioning against letting envy consume her. Another was aimed at Dad, reminding him that teaching isn't just about shaping young minds but modeling integrity in everything he does. And then there was the letter meant for me, the one she knew I'd need someday. Emma, it began, life will test your resolve many times. Remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in character. Stand firm when others falter, and never let bitterness take root in your heart. You are stronger than you think. Her words gave me strength during sleepless nights when self-doubt crept in. Had I been too harsh? Should I have given them another chance? But deep down, I knew I'd done the right thing. Protecting Grandma Rose's legacy, and my own future, was worth fighting for. Selling the lake house proved harder than anticipated. Potential buyers balked at its complicated history, and the outstanding loans tied to it further complicated matters. Still, I persevered, working closely with Patricia to untangle the mess piece by piece. By the time the sale finally closed, nearly 6 months later, I felt emotionally drained but oddly lighter. The money barely covered the debts my parents had accrued, leaving little left over for anything else. Yet somehow it felt like enough. On the day of the closing, I drove out to the lake one last time. Standing at the edge of the property, I watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting golden reflections across the water. The air smelled fresh, tinged with pine and earth, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe deeply without feeling suffocated by anger or regret. Grandma Rose's lessons echoed in my mind. Money is just a tool. True wealth comes from building something lasting. I smiled through tears, whispering softly, "Thanks for teaching me that, Grandma. I'll do my best to honor you." As I turned to leave, I noticed a small patch of wildflowers blooming near the path. They reminded me of the ones I'd planted on the deck, now gone forever. But unlike the house, these flowers belonged to no one. They grew freely, resilient despite the odds. Maybe, I thought, that's what I needed to strive for, to grow strong roots, bloom where I was planted, and find joy in simplicity. Life didn't return to normal overnight. My relationship with my parents remained strained, though occasional attempts at reconciliation surfaced here and there. One Christmas, Mom sent me a card signed with shaky handwriting, apologizing for her mistakes and wishing me peace. Dad reached out sporadically, using his old nickname for me, Princess, in texts that alternated between guilt trips and genuine remorse. I responded cautiously, setting boundaries while leaving room for healing if they ever truly wanted it. Meanwhile, I threw myself into creating the scholarship fund. Naming it after Grandma Rose felt like the perfect tribute. The first recipient, A bright-eyed high school senior eager to pursue environmental science wrote me a heartfelt thank you note that brought tears to my eyes. Knowing her dreams were being supported because of Grandma Rose's foresight filled me with pride. And so, bit by bit, I rebuilt. Not just financially, but emotionally. I learned to forgive, not necessarily my parents, but myself for trusting them so blindly. I embraced the lessons Grandma Rose had taught me, carrying them forward into every decision I made. Money would always be a part of my life, but it no longer defined me. Instead, I focused on building relationships, pursuing passions, and contributing to causes that mattered. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Martinez delivered her verdict. The weight of those words, fraud, criminal behavior, district attorney, hung heavily in the air. My parents sat motionless, their carefully constructed personas crumbling under the scrutiny of the law. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them, but then I remembered the years of manipulation, the betrayal of Grandma Rose's trust, and the countless times they dismissed my feelings as unimportant. As the judge concluded, she addressed me directly. "Miss Mitchell," she said, her voice firm yet compassionate, "your grandmother left you this inheritance with the hope that it would secure your future. It is not just money. It represents her love, her sacrifices, and her belief in you. Protect it wisely." Her words struck a chord deep within me. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about honoring Grandma Rose's legacy and proving to myself that I could stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. After the trial, Patricia and I spent weeks untangling the mess my parents had created. The sale of the lake house proved more complicated than expected due to the outstanding loans and liens placed against it. Buyers were hesitant to take on such a contentious property, and several deals fell through before we finally found someone willing to assume the risks. By the time the sale closed, nearly 7 months after the initial ruling, I was emotionally drained but determined to move forward. The proceeds barely covered the debts my parents had accrued, leaving little left over for anything else. Yet somehow, it felt like enough. Enough closure, enough justice, enough proof that I had done the right thing. On the day of the closing, I drove out to the lake one last time. Standing at the edge of the property, I watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting golden reflections across the water. The air smelled fresh, tinged with pine and earth, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe deeply without feeling suffocated by anger or regret. Grandma Rose's lessons echoed in my mind. Money is just a tool. True wealth comes from building something lasting. I smiled through tears, whispering softly, "Thanks for teaching me that, Grandma. I'll do my best to honor you." Life didn't return to normal overnight. My relationship with my parents remained strained, though occasional attempts at reconciliation surfaced here and there. One Christmas, Mom sent me a card signed with shaky handwriting, apologizing for her mistakes and wishing me peace. Dad reached out sporadically, using his old nickname for me, Princess, in texts that alternated between guilt trips and genuine remorse. I responded cautiously, setting boundaries while leaving room for healing if they ever truly wanted it. Meanwhile, I threw myself into creating the scholarship fund. Naming it after Grandma Rose felt like the perfect tribute. The first recipient, a bright-eyed high school senior eager to pursue environmental science, wrote me a heartfelt thank you note that brought tears to my eyes. Knowing her dreams were being supported because of Grandma Rose's foresight filled me with pride. And so, bit by bit, I rebuilt. Not just financially, but emotionally. I learned to forgive, not necessarily my parents, but myself for trusting them so blindly. I embraced the lessons Grandma Rose had taught me, carrying them forward into every decision I made. Money would always be a part of my life, but it no longer defined me. Instead, I focused on building relationships, pursuing passions, and contributing to causes that mattered. One evening, as I sat in my small apartment surrounded by books and plants, I realized how far I'd come. The girl who once let her parents pressure her into bad decisions was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Life still had its challenges, but I faced them head-on, armed with Grandma Rose's wisdom and the knowledge that I could handle whatever came my way. Months later, I received an unexpected visitor, A man in his late 50s, dressed casually but neatly, holding a folder under his arm. He introduced himself as Detective Mark Langston, assigned to investigate the potential criminal charges against my parents. We sat down at my kitchen table, where he explained the progress of the case. "Your mother and father have been cooperative," he said, his tone neutral. "They've admitted to making poor financial decisions, but deny any intent to defraud you." I raised an eyebrow. Cooperative? They stole my inheritance, forged documents, and spent the money on luxury items. That doesn't sound like cooperation to me. He nodded sympathetically. "I understand your frustration. However, proving intent can be tricky. Right now, we're focusing on recovering as much of the stolen funds as possible and ensuring they don't engage in similar behavior again." His words left me conflicted. Part of me wanted justice, to see them held accountable for their actions, but another part wondered if it would truly bring me peace. In the end, I decided to focus on what I could control, moving forward and building a life that reflected Grandma Rose's values. Detective Langston left shortly after, promising to keep me updated. As I returned to my bookshelf, running my fingers along the spines of well-loved novels, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. This was my space, my sanctuary, built not with inherited wealth, but with hard work, determination, and love. Years passed, and the pain of betrayal faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. My parents eventually retired, selling the bookstore and living modestly in a small condo near the city. Our interactions remained polite but distant, neither of us willing, or perhaps able, to fully bridge the gap that had formed between us. For my part, I continued to thrive. The scholarship fund grew, supporting dozens of students whose stories mirrored my own. I traveled, explored new hobbies, and cultivated meaningful friendships. And though I missed having a close-knit family, I came to realize that families aren't defined solely by bloodlines. They're built on trust, mutual respect, and shared experiences, and sometimes, those bonds are stronger than any biological connection. On the anniversary of Grandma Rose's passing, I visited her cottage, now maintained by a local community group dedicated to preserving its history. Walking through the familiar rooms, I felt her presence as strongly as ever. Her garden thrived, bursting with color and life, a testament to her enduring spirit. Kneeling beside the patch of wildflowers she loved most, I whispered a final thank you. Then, standing, I took one last look at the place that had shaped so much of who I am today. It was time to go.